Hello and welcome to the 1895 podcast with me, Tom.
And me, Rob.
Happy New Year, Rob.
And you.
We're
Tom.
back in the office. Is our first week back.
One of our first assignments since we got back. Yeah,
it's good to be back on the podcast. But how was your Christmas?
Oh yeah, great. Thank you. Great. Lovely family Christmas. Some extended downtime, which was very much needed after a grueling year last year. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, it was a great Christmas. You know, we got out and about, saw the family, all those normal things that you do over Christmas. But I'm excited to get into some industrial gases chat.
Yeah, you know when you reach that point over Christmas and you just think, okay, I've recharged the batteries, I'm ready to come back now and dive back in. I think I was probably at that point towards the end of last week, and now it's Monday the 5th of Jan. For listeners, and we are certainly ready to get back into it.
We certainly are, and for this first episode of the year, it seems to be something that we normally end up doing anyway, and that's a look back on 2025 and then also look forward towards 2026, and we've themed this one around hydrogen.
We have. I think we'll have several of these in the month of January, won't we, where we try and look at various areas and what's to come in the year ahead, what kind of 12 months we can expect. And yeah, where better to start than hydrogen, the sort of Jekyll and Hyde market in recent years.
And this was, in fact, a conversation that we had with the HD View editor, Charlie Currie, around a month ago, sort of mid-December time, and we released it as a webinar. But it was such a...
Too good not to release as a pod.
I think so, yeah. Excited to bring our listeners this conversation because Charlie is, of course, keeping an eye on that hydrogen industry every day. He lives that hydrogen industry, so knows it like no one else.
And I think as well that we didn't plan to do it, did we, until we were on air, and then we turned out thinking, look, we've actually done quite a good review of the year in hydrogen in 2025, and we've got given such a good look ahead. This is great for January. Yeah,
it's great to cover some of those big stories, those big talking points, and everything that we should be keeping an eye out on in 2026. So let's tune in to that conversation.
Charlie, thanks for joining us today. Perhaps you can start off by giving us your broad view on how hydrogen has fared in 2025.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I think you've done a pretty good job of trying to cover all the swings that we've had throughout this year. I think, as a bit of a headline statement, few years have tested the hydrogen sector like 2025. As you mentioned, policy jeopardy, project cancellations, company bankruptcies were really littering our coverage and was often the most read at times. But really, for all the upheaval that we've seen and experienced, I think it has really underscored the resilience in the sector. For each policy swing that we saw, the target markets became clearer for each company that folded. Another made gains. Every project that was canned, others were progressing. So I think, to sum up, it's really the euphoric phase that we were in 2021 to 23 is now firmly behind us, and eyes are really now on building.
Great, and I look forward to delving deeper into some of those themes with you across the course of this webinar. Now, we've spoken about the ups and the downs of this year in that introduction that we just did, and I think it's important it's impossible to narrow down the year into a handful of stories. So let's group a few of them together, shall we? And start with policy, because back in January, we saw the US Treasury relax their 45V hydrogen tax credit rules, and this was a saga that seemed to run throughout the whole first half of the year. Throughout the year, we also saw Donald Trump suspend IRA and IIJA subsidies, hydrogen hub funding cuts, and a whole host of tariffs around the midpoint of the year. So what do you make of everything that has happened with US policy this year?
I think myself and the other gasworld editors were saying towards the end of last year that Q1 would really be quite defining for the Trump administration's intentions, and we got quite a clear picture of that. Without kind of getting into the weeds of the whole story that happened, as we kind of stand here in December 25 now, the 45V clean hydrogen production tax credit that was seen as so lucrative, spiked so much interest in the US market, companies now have 5 fewer years to be able to secure that. So while that is seen as a success against the earlier proposals that would have seen it ended now, it is seen as a success. However, there are some concerns about the wider market development, especially for green hydrogen. And that is really compounded by lingering questions surrounding the federal-backed hydrogen hubs. We've already had 2 that have been cancelled over on the West Coast. Reports are suggesting that there are question marks lingering over all of the hubs that were selected. So I think at the moment, eyes are really now turning to the expanded 45Q carbon capture credit for blue hydrogen projects. As we know, the US has an abundance of natural gas. It's got the geology to support carbon storage. So it's seen as one of the lowest cost places in the world to be able to do blue hydrogen, and you have quite a lucrative incentive there. So that's where we're seeing developers really placing their bets, but it's by no means a given. As I say, the wider concerns about market development and off-takers is still placing question marks over some very large projects.
And Charlie, how does this place the US on the world stage when it comes to driving the industry forward? Is it a regressive stance now? Is it as regressive as we might think from homes and offices in other parts of the world?
I don't think the US hydrogen sector is going to be feeling quite as comfy as it was 2 years ago. Let's put it that way. I know there are concerns even around the blue hydrogen projects that are going forward, that some of the greenhouse gas emission programs that would be supporting those are coming under question by this administration, which would undermine perhaps the ability of these projects to be able to export to other markets. There are still some companies there that are creating great technology, exporting that globally, but the US as a market is not really seen as the place to be doing green hydrogen, or in some cases blue today. Companies are looking towards other regions that have their kind of policy frameworks all set up. They have a bit more of a clear view that these things are going to be there for the long run. So yeah, there's still quite a few question marks lingering over it. We're still being reassured by some associations out in the US that the market still has opportunities over the next few years, but we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out, because as we know, policy in the US at the moment is anything but certain.
And something you'll no doubt be keeping an eye across at HTView, and we'll no doubt be reporting on that next year.
Let's cross the Atlantic to Europe now. So how has policy here developed over the last 12 months, Charlie? Is it similar to the US? Is it different? What's the state of play?
So, things have stayed in the same format. We still have a very developed framework, but debates are really heating up over there. The bloc's green hydrogen rules have faced increasing scrutiny for making project development more difficult and driving up costs. But I suppose the real sticking point at the moment is demand. It's still lagging. Member states broadly have not translated usage mandates that were set out by the EU into national laws, which is seen as a real hurdle that a lot of developers are still trying to navigate at the moment. And I think overall, policymakers are facing more questions over whether this is money well spent. There have been various EU institutions highlighting the disparity in funding compared to progress. However, what we have seen in the last quarter is the EU has adopted its low carbon hydrogen rules. So that could be electrolytic hydrogen with not exclusively renewable energy. It could be blue hydrogen. It could be methane pyrolysis. So that could ease some pains. But again, I think the next few months are really going to be quite important about getting these usage mandates into national law, which could unlock a bit more certainty for off-takers who are willing to sign on the dotted line.
And where does this then position Europe on the world stage with a view to the future?
I think Europe is really seen as a demand creator for the entire world. We all know Europe lacks the low-cost renewables. It hasn't got a huge amount of land to build the renewable developments that support the gigawatts of electrolyzers it needs to meet those targets. So it itself has stated we're going to have to continue importing. But for example, the flagship NEOM green hydrogen plant, that's still waiting for these rules to come into place before Air Products will commit to building import terminals for its ammonia that can be cracked back into hydrogen. So I think a lot of eyes are still on the EU. Yeah.
And how about elsewhere, Charlie? I mean, I may be sat here in my very festive jumper at this time of year, but it was only 2 weeks ago we were on the stage in Bangkok in Thailand for our final event of the year. And there's a lot of noise coming out of the APAC region where hydrogen, other fuels and decarbonisation is concerned. So what's your take on hydrogen in APAC, for example?
I mean, China is really running away with real world development and electrolyser manufacturing. I think what we're beginning to see through a lot of reports, the early surge in deployments, it hasn't been really directed from top-down policy in Beijing. It's really come from local government initiatives trying to drive up economic growth in their province. However, Beijing has now positioned hydrogen as a priority. So I think over the next few years, this surge that we're seeing in activity in China is only going to grow. Outside of China, Japan is still progressing. It's still looking to import massive volumes for its ammonia co-firing in its coal plants and various other use cases. South Korea is still very much committed to hydrogen mobility and co-firing in a similar way to Japan. So it is seen as a real demand hotspot, but China is a place where real projects are being built and they're building up the technical expertise to start exporting globally.
Great, and I think, Rob, you've got questions surrounding China, so hold that thought.
Now, this is a topic that ties nicely into another of the hydrogen pillars, of course, technology and electrolyser manufacturing, particularly coming out of China. We've seen plenty of coverage of this across H2View this year. We had the International Energy Agency, the IEA, saying that there is no clear cost advantage to installing Chinese electrolysers abroad. The increase in OEMs, of course, and even how China could dominate the global green hydrogen market. What do you make of the rise of this region, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, a lot of this kind of build up in capacity. So we all know the electrolyser market right now is oversupplied. There were manufacturers who scaled up dramatic amounts of capacity, and the demand hasn't come about yet. In China, that happened from local governments wanting to have manufacturing set up in their regions, even if there weren't necessarily buyers for it. But what that has allowed the region to do is really refine its processes, get manufacturing costs down. In Europe, we know it's a particular concern. The EU has introduced some made in Europe guidelines for its subsidy auctions, where it's limiting Chinese-made components as part of a project mix to 25%. But I think the real point to highlight here, projects outside of the EU are clearly less concerned about going to a Chinese OEM. Now, there will be plenty of rebuttal from many Western OEMs that perhaps the long-term performance, the durability of these systems won't be there, but they do have real-world, large-scale proof points in their home market where they will have had the chance to iron out issues to improve their next-gen systems. So perhaps that is beginning to lure in more project developers.
Fantastic, thanks, Charlie. And I can confirm we saw some pretty lively discussion around China, India, and that whole evolving hydrogen and, to an extent, clean fuels piece, didn't we, in Bangkok just a couple of weeks ago?
Well, I think this is probably also a good time to discuss safety, Charlie, because I think it's fair to say we have seen an increase in accidents in the hydrogen industry over the last year, the number of fires and explosions. So why do you think that we are beginning to see this increase?
I think it'd be impossible for me to determine that. It's correct. There have been a number of incidents this year. We've seen some bus fires, hydrogen bus depots, and also some large-scale traditional hydrogen use cases. So obviously the real big concern was the explosion with SK Ulsan in South Korea this quarter. And I think from the instance that we've seen recently, those have been safety protocols in those particular settings. I think, without trying to put an explanation on why these things have been occurring, I think this has really revamped efforts on from associations and safety bodies really trying to stress the need for proper protocol, proper safety equipment throughout all hydrogen applications.
Absolutely, and surely it's only natural anyway. The more we push the boundaries in these applications, even traditional ones, the more we try and change compositions and processes, we're going to come up with some stumbling blocks along the way. We can only combat this rise, of course, by developing the technology surrounding the hydrogen industry, whether that's improved sensors, analytical equipment, valves, and even the education side of things. So is this something you've noticed an increase in?
Yeah, I think there is a growing number of companies that are willing to speak up when these incidents occur and try and underline the best practices that we need to be seeing throughout all applications. There are a number of kind of traditional sensor players beginning to bring online their own hydrogen-specific tools. So yeah, I think it's only going to be something that we're going to continue to be talking about over the next few years.
Absolutely. I can certainly say from our point of view, at least, we've had a number of conversations surrounding equipment and safety on our webinars, on our podcast. I said the 895 podcast over the past year, and there's no doubt that these will continue into 2026 and beyond, because no matter what, safety will always be that number one priority for this industry.
Just a couple of weeks ago, we saw some developments surrounding the Air Products Louisiana Blue Hydrogen project. This has been in the headlines a number of times. So what can you tell us about this story and everything that it means for the current state of hydrogen?
Yeah, so I guess if we kind of go back to the start of the year, Air Products obviously had a new management team come in focused on de-risking its project portfolio. Louisiana was highlighted as one of those that was potentially perceived as a bit more risky than what the industrial gas major would typically be doing. The reasons for that, Air Products originally wanted to retain control of the ammonia synthesis, storage and shipping element facilities of that plant, as well as the carbon capture and sequestration. So we know that the company had been working to offload those elements, but what we saw just a couple of weeks ago was that Air Products said it was in advanced talks with the fertilizer player Yara, which could potentially lead to the paused project restarting. So under that deal, Yara could take on the downstream ammonia synthesis, storage and shipping elements in Louisiana. That represents around 25% of Air Products' quoted $8 to $9 billion capex for that project. Now, just to clarify, originally Air Products said this project was going to be $4.5 billion. So the project costs have ballooned far beyond what it's comfortable with. So as I said, this does align with the management's focus on de-risking. Air Products is still trying to hand off the CO2 segment, which it expects to be doing before the midpoint of next year. So the company is still hoping to take FID in the middle of 2026, which would see it start producing in 2030. The other big part of that deal, of course, was that Yara has also agreed to take off green ammonia from the Neom green hydrogen plant and sell it on a commission basis for its own global network. Air Products' CEO has said that would eliminate the company's volume risk associated with that project. So again, for a bit of context, Air Products is a 1/3 owner of the 2.2 gigawatt Neom green hydrogen plant, but it is also the sole off-taker. The company only has one deal so far for the green hydrogen that it'll be looking to sell from that project, which represents around 45% of the output to Total Energies from 2030. Now, Neom starts producing 1.2 million tonnes of green ammonia from 2027, leaving a 3-year uncontracted period. And we know that that joint venture has no incentive to reduce its output. Air Products would be paying regardless. So it's seen as a real positive move for the company as it looks to continue having a stake in the clean hydrogen market, but in a way that it and its investors are a bit more comfortable with.
And are stories like this, are we seeing a bit of a trend of them in the latter stages of the year? Are there any other projects like this that we've seen progress in or can expect to see throughout 2026?
So I think the areas that we've seen the most action this year is what we would define as our kind of power segment. So it is your heavy industries, your ammonia, your chemicals, refining. There are multi-hundred megawatt projects, even in Europe, which has potentially struggled with its demand, that are really progressing. And I think that's a real focus on feedstock-related demand. So when hydrogen is used because it is needed to allow a reaction to take place, it only makes up a small part of that end product's cost stack, which potentially makes it a little bit more palatable for end users down the line. So certainly I think this is really an area that we're going to see a bit more momentum, is how we kind of spread the green premium, as it's referred to, throughout the value chain before it gets to the end customer.
I'd now like to dive into one of those dips that you referenced, bring us back to earth, and that's the mobility sector. Charlie, we're still seeing a number of mobility stories and mobility projects progressing. However, we're also seeing projects scale back as well. Take Alstom's train development, Stellantis pulling their hydrogen vans, the bankruptcy of Nikola is just a few examples that we've seen this year. So where are we right now when it comes to hydrogen mobility?
Yeah, it's been a real hot and cold segment this year. I think we started the year with a huge amount of the bankruptcies and setbacks that you've just described. But I think what we've actually seen since the middle of the year is a real refocusing of efforts from major companies. We saw the launch of the Global Hydrogen Mobility Alliance with the likes of Toyota and Ballard, the real kind of namesake players in the hydrogen mobility field. So they have come out with quite a pragmatic what they're describing as a pragmatic approach to starting in Europe to begin ramping up use. So they're saying that they need an €8 per kilogram pump price for it to begin to reach parity with, for trucking to reach parity with diesel. They're really hoping to decouple early deployments from Europe's green hydrogen quotas. So essentially using grey initially without penalty. So we're starting to see some activity there. However, it does feel a little bit out of step with the focus that we're seeing across the broader industry of capturing the low-hanging fruit sectors that we've already described. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. We know hydrogen mobility has gone through so many peaks and troughs over the last few decades. It's going to be interesting to see what they do differently this time and whether it's going to stick.
But isn't this just an example of there being no silver bullet to the energy transition and the whole decarbonisation of our mobility sector? Were we always driving down this road, essentially, of pragmatism?
I think potentially it's interesting. The real benefits that the proponents are beginning to talk about aren't necessarily operationally or based on cost. So we're seeing battery swapping technology coming out of places like China, which eliminates the argument of quick refueling for hydrogen vehicles. We know there are grid constraints in Europe and every other market around the world, it seems. So that's one of the key arguments, that hydrogen mobility can kind of withstand any tightening of grid connections over the coming years. But it's also about retaining competitiveness in places like Europe. We know that a lot of OEMs are facing challenges with newcomer vehicle OEMs from places like China. So it's them really trying to keep hold of this sovereign industry that they've held for the last 100 years. So the benefits are really kind of pivoting now. It's not just about decarbonisation, it's about retaining something that's strategic to Europe.
Sure, and we will still, in fact, be covering the year ahead in hydrogen mobility in a webinar early next year. So it'll be interesting to get some of those takes from those from within the industry during that.
Let's come back to you, Charlie, for some final thoughts with us. As we come to an end of this conversation, what were some of your standout points from the year? And I mean, you're quite optimistic, aren't you, going forward?
I actually think this is potentially a good platform for the industry to be moving forward from. I think, we've covered so many stories. There have been so many product and project developments over the course of the year. I'm going to avoid those. My 3 standout points have been there is more honesty entering the conversation around hydrogen. Business models are appearing to become more pragmatic, but also the policy asks from industry are becoming a lot more specific. So I think this really does give some strong foundations for the company, for the industry to begin to build.
Fantastic. And if we continue having a look towards next year, do you think we're in a better place than we were if we had this conversation at the same time last year?
I think we are. I think things are a little bit more realistic. We're talking about hydrogen being used in use cases where it makes the most sense. So that means money better spent for taxpayers. It means more project viability. It hopefully means we'll see less cancellations in our headlines. But only time will tell. As kind of Rob said at the start of this webinar, I think it hinges on the industry's ability to learn from these lessons and actually find that viable path forward now.
I'd have to agree, actually, for what it's worth. I think this time last year we were probably heading into the hydrogen winter that we all talked about and asking so many questions about where we were and why. And now, as Charlie said, we've got a path forward.
And I'm going to build on that. Final question from me, Charlie. As I said at the top of the webinar, that the question this year no longer became, can we build hydrogen projects? It was, in fact, who's going to pay for them? So is this something that we can expect an answer to in the next 12 months, or are we going to continue on this hydrogen reset?
I think in 2026, the companies that take FID will be the ones with pragmatic projects linked to real demand. So that's going to be in the sectors where the business case exists and hydrogen's use makes the most sense, as I've already said. We've already seen reports from the Hydrogen Council this year. 70% of committed offtake today is still in traditional sectors, which really plays into that kind of small part of a product's cost stack that I spoke about. So in 2026, I think we are going to continue to see more consolidation, more cancellations. But we're also going to see the first real offtake landing and hopefully sticking. But I think that conversation around commercial viability will become the only real conversation that matters for the near term.
Thanks to Charlie again for his time there. Fantastic to dive into all of that, wasn't it?
Yep, and there's, I was going to say there's fewer people sort of outside of the industry, if you like, that know what's the state of play in hydrogen better than Charlie. So great to get to grips with that. And he is, I think as we teased it out there as well, he is quite optimistic about the year ahead from a very kind of pragmatic or realistic point of view, and I think that's a really healthy place to be.
And I think it's going to be an exciting year ahead, and we're going to be covering hydrogen across our webinars throughout this year. We've got so many coming up. Those can be viewed at gasworld.tv
and this podcast, no doubt.
And this podcast, no doubt, and insights every day as well on h2-view.com. So listeners, check out all of those fantastic services, aren't they?
They are indeed, yeah. And so many insights to get through. So yeah, and look out, I guess, as we said, look out for the rest of the month for more deep dives into what's to come in the industry.
Yes, well, thanks for your time today, Rob. Let's crack on with this year.
Let's get back up to speed, shall we?
Yes, and listeners, in the meantime, do please like, follow and share the 1895 podcast, and we'll be back again next week.